A warm welcome to everybody in this partner session at the Global Media Forum. We're talking for 30 minutes, which is very short, about breaking up national media bubbles, what potential for cross-border collaborative journalism initiatives. We will present two different perspectives on the issue, one from Africa and one from Europe. And I'm very much looking forward to our interlocutors, to our speakers that I will present to you very shortly. The topic is what here? A majority of available media content mostly threats topics defined in terms of national discourses rather than transnational relevances. I don't think this is something really new. The media like Deutsche Welle, for instance, or France Médias Monde are, as international media, are somehow the exception. Yes, all the media, or most of the media, have correspondent networks, so people from abroad reporting back home, but what they do usually is reporting back home to a domestic audience. So the national bubble remains intact. We have seen in the past years that poses a problem, particularly for concepts like the European Union, where often the media coverage is reflective, mirroring politics, which is also driven on a national basis. So on the other hand, you have social media, which is global. You have the internet, which is global. You have disinformation, fake news, which is global. So how can we bring something into the debate on a constructive level, which is breaking up the national media bubbles, potentially by collaborative journalism initiatives? So here are my speakers. First of all, we would like to dive a little bit deeper in this topic with the help of Paulina Fröhlich. She is the head of the Future of Democracy program at the Progressives Zentrum, a bright think tank at Berlin. And she was in charge also of a program that was called Daring New Spaces, very interesting, under the presidency of Germany in the EU in the last half of 2020. Very interesting concept. So thank you very much for being with us, Paulina. We have Dr. Njoki Chege, the director of the Innovation Center at the Graduate School of Media and Communications at Aga Khan University in Nairobi, a former renowned journalist and teacher. Thank you very much, Dr. Chege, being with us. We will have a look on collaborative initiatives on journalism in Africa. Thank you very much reaching us. We have Gunnar Kettels, the head of content for a pan-European, multinational, 6-language social media project launched by Deutsche Welle, France Médias Monde, and partners. She joins us from Berlin. Hi, Gunnar. She's the head of content of ENTR. And last but not least, Ségolène Alimandou, the editor-in-chief of ENTR from France Médias Monde, joins us from Paris. Let's come to you, ladies, a little bit later. Let's start with Paulina Fröhlich. Paulina, when you look at public spaces, particularly in Europe, but maybe also outside of Europe, what is your perception on how public spaces are played by media, and what does the national perspective and title as impact on a understanding of a common public space for the time being?
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you very much for having me. If you allow, let me take a step back, because in preparation for projects, panels, or interviews, I'm asked a lot whether I studied politics or sociology. And my answer always is none of them. In my early 20s, I was highly interested in the reason of conflicts. In articles and books I read, in talks and features I listened to, they taught me that the very basic reason for conflict is the distribution and the uses of resources. So actually, I studied water. Or maybe the basic resource for all living beings. Last weekend, in preparation for this very session, I thought about the barriers and potentials of public spheres, and I compared some of its aspects to the aspects of water. And I would like to share these thoughts with you, if I may, before coming and reflecting about some concrete observations. So first thought is, like water, public spheres exist mostly everywhere. Sometimes it seems like they don't, until we understand that they simply change their aggregate state. Like water, public spheres naturally take the path of least resistance, finding a mass to join finally. When humans interfere into infrastructure for water, like building dams or storages or water power plants, underground pipes, the water diversifies and runs faster. It no more runs the path of least resistance, but faces barriers, accelerators as well, and all sorts of problems, right? So people fight about how much water is there, for whom, who it belongs to, how much it costs. And human history is full and shows an astonishing chronology of privatization and then again public nationalization of water, each time causing a massive challenge. So when humans gather and make plans for interfering into public spheres, the topic we have today, whether it's for the good or for the bad that they interfere, challenges arises as well. Today we hotly debate, also in our think tank, about who is part of what sphere and whether we should pay, maybe by money or data, to move within a public sphere, and in what digital social spaces, which are in private hands mostly, whether they can be considered as a public sphere as well, by functionality and not by ownership. As much as I believe in the human right for fresh drinking water, I think, in a human right for a free public sphere. So while the water keeps me alive, the public sphere keeps me free. It informs and it inspires me, it challenges me, and I can act and react in it. And that, I think, is a basic expression of freedom. What certainly differs among the two is that water in the future is expected to be rather scarce, while I sincerely hope that the public sphere in the future will become actually more and brighter. The public spheres we are used to in Europe, one could argue, I think, are quite stereotypical European. What I mean by that is that they are numerous, reliable, they are antique, and in somewhat inflexible. It is extremely difficult, and also our projects have shown that, to introduce a new puzzle piece into this old-fashioned round of public spheres. So I would like to share some concrete reflections about our experiences. You've asked about, Patrick. So some of the greatest troubles we are facing as a think tank who is working around digital spaces to support the European civil society is the huge lack of knowledge transfer systems. We know something if we know someone. So knowledge and skill is extremely person and network bound. There is so little, almost non-intelligent digital way of understanding in an efficient and effective way what public sphere initiatives are already out there. A second point, which is a challenge, is that there is very little funding available for public digital infrastructure. There are a lot of funders, especially in Germany, for dialogue workshops, for exchange meetings between Europeans, or even for, let's say, printing a book you have co-written with civil society organizations for a better public sphere. But the digital infrastructure they actually need to build themselves as civil society is really hard to get funded. A third challenge I would like to bring up is that we are up against pretty strong competition. In digital public spaces, where we try to establish, I would say, a feeling of community, but also, of course, offering diverse information and opinion pieces, especially when it comes to journalism, and we seek to connect and empower one another, we are competing with big tech firms and platforms like TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, that seemingly offer similar things. Group organization in Facebook, for example, news and debate, but they're all in private hands. I would also like to come quickly to the strong potentials and positive observations I have seen and experienced. First, I believe that the group calling for more and better public spaces, especially digitally, is growing from day to day. And it includes artists and cultural practitioners as much as journalists and civic tech experts, participants from social movements as well, seniors and youth. They all are less invisible today, and they slowly move on the political agenda, and they become more visible in everyday life, as also this conference shows. A second potential is that the interdisciplinary thinking and working becomes normality within this group. So the artists know that they cannot do this without the techies. The journalists know they cannot create a space which works as a one-way street. The think tanks or academia involved work closely together with civil society actors from shrinking spaces countries, for example, and political actors or the ones from social startup businesses support the idea of a bottom-up process. So this broad involvement of skills and needs is today understood as a strength and also used as one. Lastly, I believe we should also observe the positive effect of a diversified and public sphere. There would be enormous those effects. Because, for example, the digital spaces for a European civil society, like we have in our European hub platform, but also in the Daring New Spaces project, Patrick, you mentioned, for example, they would benefit nothing less than the European democracy. Challenging trends we observe in many countries, such as the mistrust in state institutions, the imbalanced representation we have, or the lack of tangible future visions, would all be challenged by a broad and stronger public sphere. This is a high potential, and I believe it fuels us a lot. So coming back, and lastly to the analogy I said from the beginning, I would say that the questions I had and have about something as essential as water helped me to raise questions, something essential like the public sphere. Back then, as a water manager, I said, having water to drink is good. What did it take you to get it? Is it safe and fresh so that it keeps you healthy and strong? Did you pay an enormous amount of money to get it? Can you rely on the source? Today, working in the Future of Democracy program, I say, having a public sphere is good, but what did it take you to get it? Does it offer you access to reliable source of information? Does it cost you money? Does it keep you free?
Thank you very much, Paulina. This is very great insight. I very much loved the example of the water. And one thing really struck me: you saying public spheres keeps me free. Thank you very much. This is a great insight. We will come back to you at the very end. I hope that we have the time to come back to you for a short comment on the discussion. Let me turn to Nyoki Chege in Nairobi. To turn it quite directly to the African context, the discussion about public sphere that transcends national bubbles, is this something that has been growing in the recent years, particularly in the media sector, according to your experience?
Yes, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. So when you talk about transnational, communication and media, it's something that we have seen locally here at the Innovation Center at the Aga Khan University, where we are supporting innovators from across East Africa, that is Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. And what we are seeing is that, in as much as audiences are not homogeneous, we are seeing some strands of similarity across audiences. Such that even for the startups that we are funding, the media startups that we are funding, we are seeing them go into some new spaces, doing stories for minorities, stories for chronically underserved audiences that have not previously seen their stories in the what you call legacy media. So in the startup world, particularly in the media startup world, this is a growing trend, and we are seeing a lot more young people taking up these positions with the affordabilities of digital media, the affordabilities of public spheres and social media, YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and all that. We're seeing these bubbles just being burst, and we are seeing situations where young people producing content that is nation agnostic. It's not content just for Kenya or Tanzania or Uganda, but content that resonates across the board. But I think just like the previous speaker alluded to, there needs to be a lot more support for these young innovators, they need to be much more training, coaching, mentorship even. But most importantly, we need to aggressively improve their skill sets. We need to aggressively support them to do the stories that have been for a very long time ignored by legacy media, because we are seeing a huge demand, particularly for younger audiences, young people under 35s who have been feeling like they have not been fully represented in quote unquote legacy media, and such kinds of opportunities allow for young innovators to leverage on their digital skills for storytelling. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nuki. Very interesting saying you the startups are thinking quite differently. So let's later in the discussion with Ségolène and Gunnar check out how this is interfering to legacy media or classical media in terms of using platforms in a very different way, being differently minded, and maybe given a great potential to break up these bubbles. Let us show now. Let's have a look on the ENTR project, which is the one that Gunnar and Ségolène, that you will discover in a couple of minutes, leading, which is a collaborative project with 10 European partners. It's on social media. It's very young. It's very fresh. Let's have a look like it looks like.
Olá, eu sou a Joana e bem-vindos a Lisboa.
Hi, mein Name ist Lukas und ich arbeite für das ENTR-Team in Berlin.
Cześć, nazywam się Bartłomiej Wróblewicz i jestem dziennikarzem onet.pl.
Salut, je m'appelle Camille, j'ai 26 ans et je suis journaliste à Paris.
Bună, salutări din București, eu sunt Diana.
O ENTR vai mostrar que a juventude europeia é realmente proativa.
ENTR bedeutet für mich neue Perspektiven, verschiedene Blickwinkel zusammenzubringen und gemeinsam Geschichten zu erzählen.
ENTR este pentru noi un loc al dezbaterilor constructive, al cunoașterii și al exemplelor pozitive în spirit european.
ENTR to młode pokolenie starego, niezależnego dziennikarstwa.
ENTR, it's original content that gives a voice to young people in Europe.
So that was a short presentation of ENTR. I'm now with Gunnar in Berlin and with Ségolène in Paris. Gunnar, you are in a daily exchange with all these partners across Europe. So what is different here to a job in a newsroom leading another whatever journalistic product? I mean, you're working in an international environment, so that's not new to collaborate with partners. That's not new to think in different languages, maybe. Or is that different?
Yes, I would say so, because in the contexts I have worked in, for example, it's always been one specific media organization. And when we're talking about ENTR, there are partners who all work, who have the same rights when it comes to decision making. And the purpose of the project is to collaborate, to define what we want to do together. So it's a completely different process because nothing is a given. Everything has to be defined together. Topics have to be defined together, and workflows have to be defined together.
What is the particular new aspect in this collaborative endeavor that you started since March 1st, when you look at co-leading it with Ségolène in Paris? So what is the specific thing?
For me or for Ségolène?
It's for you, Gunnar.
Okay, sorry. Yes, it's. I think what is special is that we are trying to find topics that are relevant for our different audiences, and we're not just looking at. Well, we're not defining our audience as one, as young Europeans, which they are, but we are looking at a very differentiated audience. We have people in Portugal, in Romania, in Poland, in Germany, in France. I hope I didn't forget any country. And then we have people who speak English all across Europe. So it's a very a varied audience we're looking at, and we're trying to address, and we're trying to find topics that are relevant for all of them. And we're trying to break those topics down in a way that they speak to these people in very different places with very different backgrounds.
Ségolène, from your point of view, Paulina has mentioned this issue of knowledge and skills on one hand, and on the second hand, saying that startups, and I include influencers and people that work in social media and are not having socialized in the classical media, are thinking such kind of project quite differently. How are you profiting from this expertise, from this experience in the project?
I'm sorry, Patrick, I can't really hear you. And could you repeat the question, please?
I said, Paulina mentioned that it's very important to share knowledge and skills when you want to breach these national bubbles. And she mentioned also the different startup culture that makes it easier to breach these bubbles. Is this something you are living also with this project, ENTR?
Yeah, we want to break the bubbles, the national bubbles, and we are trying to create different formats, mutual formats that enable us to work together, because that's our main challenge, that every newsroom in the 5 countries work together. So it's not only a question of skills, it's a question of communication. We have to talk and to talk a lot, to identify the topics that are relevant for our audience. We have to create a common interest for our audience. And then the second step is that each partner will identify the specificity of its country. And what we have to do is also to adapt the contents of the partners to share the different perspectives that exist in the projects, that exist in all the partners, in all the projects partners. And we also we are also working on other formats that are mutual formats. So we are trying to produce together. So that's we've got several challenges to work together and to produce together and to break these national bubbles.
You try this also by identifying topics that are common for different audiences, very different audiences, from Romania over Portugal to Germany, France, Poland. Do you think it's easy? Is it true that at the end of the day, young people are mainly interested in common topics, or does this vary from country to your experience?
That's the question, because as you know, ENTR has only 4 weeks now, so we are trying to create a community in 6 languages. So maybe we will see how each community that we are going to create reacts to the different common topics that we are working on. So for the moment, we identify topics that we are pretty sure that are relevant for the young Europeans, but I think maybe week after week we will define maybe more precise topics, specific topics, and sometimes we will have to be aware that it can be less relevant for some audience than and maybe very interesting for other audience. We have to learn from that.
I understand that it is a learning process. Before we integrate again Njoki Chege, which we lost unfortunately in the last couple of minutes, the connection. Before integrating, Gunnar, very briefly, what do you think? How are you going to cope with that uncertainty to identify these topics that might be relevant for young Europeans? How are you coping with it?
I would say one beauty of social media is that we can find out immediately. I mean, we can ask our community what they are interested in, and they will tell us. I mean, it's interactive, so we will know what works and what doesn't, sort of straight away. And other than that, I would say I actually believe that these same topics are relevant to our different audiences, but it's a matter of how we tell them. So it's for certain that big issues like climate change, what kind of future we want to live in, economics, social issues, human rights, those are big, broad topics that are for sure are very relevant to all young people in Europe. And it's always a matter of breaking them down in a way that people can identify with these topics. So this is, I think, our aim and what we're trying to do.
Thank you very much. Njoki, you couldn't follow the whole discussion, I'm afraid, because we lost the connection. But jumping on the last subject we discussed, when you look at topics for African audiences, for instance, what are the topics that were working cross-border to your experience?
Thank you very much. I think I actually followed the conversation, but some of the topics that actually really matter, and this is a myth that we have been debunking for the past couple of years, because the myth has been that young people are only interested in entertainment, news, soft kind of information, but that's not the case, particularly from my experience and the experience of the startups that we work with. Some of the hot topics that transcend national borders include issues like governance, corruption, politics is a big deal. But also young people are increasingly becoming very interested in other topics like work-life balance. How do they balance their, professional life with their personal lives, for example, not forgetting the fact that there's a very huge market for high quality lifestyle content. And we're not talking about entertainment, we're talking about content that will help them improve their lives, whether it is from a health perspective, financial information, savings, personal financial management, and even also some interesting topics around innovation. They want to understand how technology affects their lives. They're also very interested in what's happening across the borders. They want to understand, what's happening, for example, in the U.S. with the, elections last year, for example. So I just think that what this digital media has allowed us to do is to be able to, for young people to be able to tell their own stories and to tell stories from their own perspective. So we are having startups that are talking about governance from a perspective of an under 35-year-old. They're talking about corruption and how it affects them at that level of youth. And I think that kind of explainer journalism, just like my previous speakers have alluded to, is actually very important in driving not just national dialogues, but also transnational and possibly even continental dialogues. So I just think that the topics are not different from what is discussed in the classical legacy media. What matters and the variation comes in the angle that these stories and these topics are approached from, because they are approached from how is my country's governance affecting me as a young person, as somebody who's starting out in my career, as somebody who wants to begin the process of owning a home, starting a family, and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. At the very end of this session, unfortunately, we are running out of time, but this was great insight. Thank you very much. What I keep is tell their story their own way. That's something obviously that is very important, and digital media gives us great opportunities. So journalists have to find ways to match that, and at the same time deliver information and insights and journalism and teaching. Thank you very much, Ségolène. Thank you very much, Gunnar. Good luck with ENTR. Thank you very much, Jogi Cheke and Paulina Fröhlich, for participating in this session.